Child Protection Week ends tomorrow, but the call continues for South Africans to unite and stop the cycle of neglect, abuse and violence against children. To do his part, Addiction and Wellness Counsellor Chris West Russell has been holding school and college addiction awareness talks. He joins us now to speak about this movement. Chris, thank you very much for your time this evening. So we know there are many socio-economic factors that contribute to addiction, but very importantly, the framing around addiction is changing in a very positive way, from something that's seen as a shameful personal flaw to, something that's seen as a mental health disorder that requires support instead of judgment. But how does that help young people and children to cope with and to fight addiction?
Well, it's a very interesting thing, actually, because you started this off really well to say that the stigma of addiction is what's holding back the ability to talk about it completely freely and openly. And that's really what I'm trying to do in the schools, is to be able to present myself as a recovering addict now for 40 years. I've been in remission of my disease. And to get them to understand that we're dealing with not just a thing, we're actually dealing with a genetic disease that's passed down from generation to generation. And so the idea is that I go to schools and I encourage us to do two talks, one to the children, the students, and the students can range from the age of 10 all the way up to 18. And we will then discuss in my presentation the realities of what addiction really is and how it can affect them, and that there are, basically very few people are immune to this, and they need to understand why. Like myself, I just didn't realize the dangers of it, and I got caught on it very, very badly. I ended up on heroin and cocaine and in the streets in London, and that's where I ended up. So I needed to find out for myself when I came into rehab and started my journey in remission what actually happened. And so in my research that I've been doing for many years now is to realize that the addiction, first of all, is a disease, which I didn't know. It is a chronic disease, mental health disease, and the World Health Organization emphasize that as a registered mental health disease that must be treated like any other. And so my talks predominantly in the schools is to talk to the students and go through everything and ask them questions about particular addictions they might be experiencing at the moment. And I find that I'm dealing a lot with gaming and a lot with vaping. Obviously marijuana is another issue as well. So the actual action of addiction, of active addiction, is the end of the story. What we're trying to do, or what I'm trying to do, is to be able to start the communication and connection again with families and friends, that they're able to talk freely about addiction without fear or shame. And then in the evening, I get a parents' talk where we talk about addiction, very much the same presentation, so the parents can see what their children have been told in the morning, and then I talk further with them about aiding and abetting and denial, and then going into very much explaining the actual reversal of addiction is connection and communication, which with children, and then that forms a trust, which then can form a loving relationship, which is really where the addicts are looking for. They're just trying to find a coping mechanism, and unfortunately their coping mechanism tends to be the quick fix of drugs, alcohol and vaping. And so that's their escape mechanism, and it's just trying to reverse that type of quick fix into being able to communicate comfortably and safely.
Chris, there's a very fine line between obviously helping young people understand addiction as a mental health disease, something that is genetically passed down, while at the same time being careful not to allow them to use that to go into victim mode and to say, well, it's not my responsibility, I've been afflicted with this and that's why this is okay. So do the young people that you work with understand the very fine lines between that and the responsibility that comes with claiming and owning addiction and moving past it?
Yeah, it's a very good point you brought up, and it's really important because it's not your fault you're born with addiction, with the what I call the dormant gene of addiction. Where you are responsible is predominantly for the choices that you make. And you know, if that is drugs and alcohol, then you've got to take responsibility for that and the behaviour that comes with it. So there's a very clear definition between what you are responsible for and what is not your fault. What is not your fault is that you were born with the gene of addiction, and it has been activated by circumstances and environment that has made you feel uncomfortable and anxious. Anxiety is a very big thing. Stress is a big thing. Fear is another very big thing. So with those elements, it's how do I cope with these feelings? And with that, we're now talking about freely speaking about things that children and students didn't realize they could talk about, and even realize that their parents are going through the same thing in so many cases, or have been through the same thing. And by that communication can start saying, well, I didn't know I could speak about these things. I think the one thing I do talk about is the internal silent pain that is the one thing a lot of us carry that we don't understand, but we have this pain inside that is ever present, and yet we have just got used to it. It's become a norm. So we then find ourselves keeping quiet, but this pain continues to be of presence, and so we try to find a way of escaping. And you know, we find a lot of kids on gaming because that's their method of escaping and dumbing out very clearly. And then the vaping is a completely different story altogether. It's really a matter of why are you doing it? Why are you having to go there? And all of these are very subtle gateways into activating addiction. And so once that's activated, you're going to be wanting to find something else, because your tolerance and things have dropped, or you have need to escape from day-to-day life because you're not coping.
Chris, there are also very different socio-economic situations in which children and young people find themselves expressing their addiction. And you're talking about being able to communicate openly with parents and teachers and that kind of support structure. But for many of the most vulnerable young people in South Africa, they have none of those support structures. And I'm talking about the poorest of the poor, who in many cases will never have someone to tell them that addiction is a disease, will never have the kind of open conversations with adults about addiction that you are very lucky, and that the children that you speak to are very lucky to have with you. What can be done for those who you know, have very little resources to try and understand and cope with and take on the many years-long journey to try and recover?
Yes, I think the broad range of children I speak to are massive. Yes, there are the colleges and the schools, which is what I do quite a lot of, but I do certainly go into the townships, and I'm invited into churches and communities where I will speak, and we will sit down and talk about pastoral care people who are there, or even social workers there, where we can start a group of being able to talk to each other freely and understand that it's okay to do so. But I do tend to get within the communities, I do tend to find a champion who can lead that forward within those communities that you're talking about, that they do realize that they can talk about it and be free about it, but it isn't a process that's going to happen overnight. It is to build up trust in anybody, especially from where you might have been, is a very slow process, but it does come about purely by not being stigmatized as a junkie or a dropout or whatever else that we get to. It is critical that the communication starts, and it can be done in any environment. And I'm experiencing that myself. I've had the phenomenal privilege of working in a rehab in Kraaifontein, which runs literally on the smell of an oil rag. And yet they are succeeding incredibly well in reaching out to so many people in the communities around Kraaifontein, around Grondel, and many other places that are definitely reaching out to ask for help. And in that I'm doing online courses, which is called the Recovery Course, where I'm inviting communities around the country. Actually, I've got one starting on Tuesday. Of not only do I have people from rehabs who can join the course, but I have one group joining us from Myanmar and London at the same time, which is really exciting.
Excellent. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Chris West Russell, an addiction and wellness counsellor, and we're speaking to him as part of Child Protection Week, which ends this weekend.